All right, guys, so we are doing, finally, because it's here, a test of the new MacBook M1 Intel Silicone MacBook Pro. And I know that there are a bunch of benchmarks out there already, but I want to do this a little different. So I'm going to do this based around what you and I would probably experience if we were actually using these machines for heavy lifting. And this is one of the biggest reasons that I was so excited about the new MacBook, is because of the supposed non-heating issues that the Intel processors have. So I did already, and this part's been done already, but I screen recorded everything. I did these tests on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So this was a 16-inch MacBook Pro, like I just said, i9, 2.3 gigahertz, 32 gigs of RAM, and the 8 gig 5500M card. I believe that's right. And we're going to put that up against this. Now, this is the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1 processor, and it's the one with the 512 gig. But really, processor-wise, GPU-wise, it's the exact same machine because those two levels are the same. 8 gigs of RAM. So 8 gigs for everything versus 8 gig video card with 32 gigs of system memory. So how does this perform? Now, what we're doing differently is we are going to run all these tests back to back. Okay, so here's the string, okay? So what we're going to do is start off with a speed test of the hard drive. So we're just going to do a Blackmagic disk speed test. Then we're going to follow it with Geekbench. Then we're going to follow it with Cinebench. And then we're going to follow it, lastly, for benchmarks, with Heaven. After that's finished, I've got a project, a Final Cut project on here, because this is the thing. With the i9, it's fast out of the gate. But as that processor would heat up, where you and I are physically working on it, the processor clock speed would just drop and drop and drop. So this is going to give this a long section of heavy lifting. So once the benchmarks are done, we're immediately going to open this Final Cut file, same Final Cut file that we had actually on the Intel 16-inch. We're going to erase all the render files. We're going to see how long it takes to do the render. And then once the render is finished, we're going to see how long it takes to actually export. All right, coming up. All right, so number one, here we go. We're gonna run Blackmagic, so Blackmagic speed test. And while this is loading, you guys can see what the 16-inch had for its speed test. And it has a fast drive in it without question, but we'll see how this compares. So we're gonna come up here, hit start. Yeah, see, that's a fast drive. And I did test this last night, and I did find that the write was really consistent, whereas the read fluctuated a bit. There you go, see the read? You're definitely getting anywhere from write from 27 up to 3,000. Whereas the read usually between 2 to 3,000. So that's a crazy fast drive. So you can do just about anything on it, and it should be up for the task. I'm super impressed with how fast the drive is on this machine. Okay, so next one, we're going to Geekbench. We're just gonna open this up, and it does have Apple Silicon, so that's good. We're gonna bring this up to the center of the screen for you guys. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. And we're gonna run Apple Silicon, run CPU benchmark. And again, while this is happening right now, I'm gonna put the benchmark, same thing that the 16-inch MacBook had. So it was its final score for the CPU. Again, nothing to sneeze at, that's a great score. And the other thing I want you guys, and I'm definitely going to be paying attention to this, at this point in time, usually the fans in the 16-inch would have probably started up already. They would have already started cranking up, and that would have been doing whatever it could to help keep the processors cold. And as you can tell right now, nothing. And again, this is a MacBook Pro, so it does have internal fans, but so far nothing at all, which is really good. I'm gonna kick to the end of this one. All right, so here we go. Here's popping up our final score there. Single core 1710, multi-core 7195. You guys can see it there. We'll close Chrome back up. And then we're gonna do the compute. And we're gonna do this one as a metal, because that's what I did for the Intel based as well. So we're gonna run that, and we will come back as soon as this one finishes. Should be hopefully fairly quick. All right, and here's that score popping up. We're getting 21,305, which is, again, really great. Like, those are great scores, especially when you kind of scroll down here and you look at where this is hitting. Metal performance, you know, really nice scores coming out of this. All right, so you guys have those. We're gonna put at the end too, we'll put up a screen with all the different scores on them. So, and you can see here device, just so you guys can see that, right? Apple M1 at 3.2 gigahertz, running 8 gigs of RAM right there. Okay, so let's close out of that. Next, we're gonna go and do Cinebench. So we'll crack open Cinebench here. And again, the reason we're doing this is that we want the machine, if it's gonna heat up, to have any of that thermal throttling that could happen. I want it to happen because that's what you and I will experience when we actually use this. So we're gonna do CPU multi-core. Ready and go. Again, while this is happening, I'm gonna show you the final benchmark speed of the Intel i9 MacBook Pro. And you guys can take a look at that just to see what the number is that we're kind of comparing this machine up against. This one's moving quite nicely. And you can see at the very top there of the screen, the CPUs are just racked right up, which is great. All right, so we got a score of 7503 for our multi-core, and then we're gonna go to a single core. Click that one. Now this one definitely is gonna take a bit of time, but it won't be any time for you guys. All right, so just while this is continuing to move forward here, I want you to look over on the bottom left-hand corner here, and it's the ranking for CPU multi-core, and just look at some of the processors that it's actually beating. You know, the Intel Xeon 2.66 gigahertz, the 4.2 gigahertz Intel Core i7, 2.8 gigahertz 11th gen Intel Core i7. You know, it's definitely holding its own without question. And again, I'll put up a screen here with the Cinebench score for multi-core of the MacBook Pro 16-inch i9, so you guys can see a comparison between what these machines were doing. As expected, the single core is taking a bit of time here, but we'll get back to it once it finishes. Okay guys, it looks like we are on the final little bit. There it goes. And we'll see what that single core is like. One more block. Done. So 1495. And that actually puts it up again higher than a lot of those processors. Wow. And again, if you're listening, absolute silence, no fan at all. So that's amazing. So let's now go to Haven. I think it's Heaven. And we are gonna run this and run the benchmark. All right. So once this comes up here, loads up, we'll get that firing up. All right, benchmark. And again, you guys don't necessarily need to sit and watch all this. You guys, well, you can see it here on the screen, but I will just kind of flash over to the final scores again to the 16-inch MacBook Pro i9 so that you can kind of get a comparison. So I'm gonna let this finish its run through, and then we'll compare that minimum frame rate to kind of maximum frame rate average and stuff like that. You guys will be able to see it on the screen, and I'll be back as soon as this finishes. All right, guys, there we go. So again, we'll put this up kind of split screen. This on the left is going to be the M1 MacBook Pro's benchmark, and then on the right, you guys are going to see the benchmark from the 16-inch i9 with a 5500M with 8 gigs of RAM. So how close are they, right? All right, the next one here. The next one is probably the most important one, because this thing has had a chance now to be running for a bit. So if she's going to be heating up, she should have been doing it already. But now we're going to be running a Final Cut project. It's about a 20-minute project, and that 20-minute project contains luts and sharpening and multiple layers and audio and titles on it, a whole bunch of color correction. It is what you and I would in real life be using a MacBook Pro probably for in regards to video editing. Now with the i9 MacBook Pro, it was fast until it started to heat up, which didn't take too long. And because of that, it would slowly just, you could see the CPU just drop. And the first few minutes would be fast, and as it was in render mode, longer and longer, it would just slow down even more and more. So we're going to open up the exact same project. I have a few plugins here that aren't compatible yet, so that's also something you guys have to be aware of. Just, you know, they're not everything's perfect yet. Hopefully they'll all get updated soon. But we'll crank this open. All right, there it is. Excellent. And what we're going to do here, make sure this is nice and bright for you guys. We are going to make this window a little smaller. Okay. We're going to bring up a stopwatch. All right. You set that to nothing. We're going to come into Final Cut here. And what we're going to do is we're going to delete the generated files. We're going to delete, actually we got to do that to the whole library. I don't know why that screen just went down low. Come back here. Do it to the whole library here. File. Delete all the generated files, including all the render files, because we want it to re-render. So we're going to hit OK here. Come back here. And there she goes. So she started. And you can see that render happening. So what we're going to do is keep that up. And you guys don't necessarily have to sit here for the whole time. But again, what I'm going to do is pop up the total amount of time that it took for the MacBook Pro 16-inch to finish this render. And then we'll compare it with this machine. All right, I'll be back. It'll be fast for you, long time for me. Okay. Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear that. At about 4.5 minutes, the fans kicked in. So again, this is really important for those of us that are doing video editing, why we want to go to the Pro versus the Air, because the Air has no fans in it to help with the cooling. This has got its fans on now. So the fans have kicked in after 4 benchmarks and 4 minutes of heavy rendering, whereas the other machine would have started the fans right away. Okay, we'll be back. So just so you guys know, the other machine I just went and checked because I couldn't remember how long it took. It took 25 minutes. 25 minutes to render this out. We're at almost 40% at 5 minutes. So I'm curious because the other machine would have just started to slow down. It would have been slowing down. I want to see if this one kind of keeps up its speed. All right, we'll be back. Okay, and here's kind of the funny part. We're at 8 minutes right now. You can see the processors again are up pretty high, and the fans have turned off. Yeah, this thing's gone silent again. So blew the fans for about 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, And now the fans have turned off again. So I don't know if it's cooled it enough that it's like we don't need the fans anymore. But on a side note, on whatever, we're at 50% and we're at 8.5 minutes. So 8.5 minutes, if it stays at this speed, we should be done definitely under 20. And if it can cut 5 or 6 minutes off of the render, that's huge. You know, that machine cost me $4,000 and this one's like $2,000. All right, well, we'll see if there's any throttling that happens. Okay, so we're back at 10 minutes. The fans are on a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. But I want you to see up the top, see where it says CPU? You guys can see it just right up here. See how they're not peaked out anymore? So my thought is that when the fans kick in, they realize that the processors are really hot, or the processor is really hot, or getting hot. So they start the cooling phase. So what happens is the CPU throttles a little bit to drop it down. With the fan, it actually cools it. And because these chips are so efficient, it cools the chips down quite quickly. And then the fan just kind of slows down and then they ramp right back up again. So unlike the Intel, where that if you're using them, once they start to get hot, they just drop and they just stay there. They don't stop getting hot. Even with as much fan and air circulation as the machine can push at it, it just can't cool down. These though, on the other hand, I think what happens is that they start to get a little warm. Once the fan kicks in, it's enough to cool them down and then they throttle right back up again. So it's kind of interesting. You can see my CPU up there. Some of the cores have started to climb back up again, right? And I don't know if this is accurate, but there's the 4 really powerful cores and then there's the 4 high efficiency cores. And you see how the 4 first ones drop down and then every once in a while they ramp back up again, right? And I think that's when they start to get warm, they cool, and then they pop back up again when they are cool enough, I guess. But it's interesting. I'd like to see somebody do a real big test on this. I, of course, am just relying strictly on visual stats and performance at the end. But we're not even halfway point for the Mac Pro 16-inch would have been around 12 and a half, 13 minutes. We're at 12 and we're at almost 70% done. So this, I think, is going to be way faster. All right, well, we'll be back. All right, guys, we're at the final 9%. 16 minutes we just broke. So unless something crazy happens, this is going to just whoop the i9's butt by, I would say, easily probably 6-7 minutes, which is crazy. So I'll zoom this part ahead so we can get a final time. And the other thing I want you to notice, just before I do that, the fans are off again. Like the fans are down again. And the other thing is, this machine right now, you got to remember, it's been rendering out here for almost 20 minutes. It's been doing all kinds of benchmarks. It's been worked really hard right now. And it still says I have, you know, over 3.5 hours of battery life left in it. But my other one would have been like, you better have this plugged in right now. So, and this is heavy lifting for this machine. So if I had to do something in the field for 3.5, 4 hours and on a full battery, you could. Look at this, 98%, 99%. Get my stopwatch ready. Boom. 17 minutes, 29 seconds. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. 8 minutes faster. 8 minutes faster. And that's, again, after it's done all that. So there may be some thermal throttling on this machine, possibly, but I think it's so efficient that it has the ability to cool. This literally just wiped the floor with the i9. That's impressive, and that's real world. You know, this is literally a project that I've been working on, and you can see it up there. You know, scrolls through lovely, plays good, nothing wrong with that. All 4K. That's a win. All right, guys, if you have any questions or want me to run any tests on this machine, I'm actually going to do something probably similar to my iMac if you guys want to see that. All right, guys, I'm going to leave you there. Wow, that's impressive. All right, guys, like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit the little notification bell. That's cool. And we'll see you guys next video. Later, my friends. So fast. So fast.